you could just kill that.
Perfect. Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming again to Wayfair. Mr. Snover, thank you for showing up again. Let's see. Locked. Okay, we had the meetup 6 months ago in December, and we just started our kind of DevOps transformation. We took a couple months and had a plan. We tested a couple things, and I wanted to show basically what you can do in 6 months at an enterprise, just to kind of prove it's possible. So we're 1,000 Windows servers about, we're, God, what are we, 6,000 Linux servers? We're getting up there and everything. So I kind of wanted to just basically show a production change via server configuration, talk about our production change for .NET deploys, and then basically hand it off. So let's first start. So our server configuration. We basically, the only thing we wanted to do was commit to Git. We don't want to do anything else. And obviously we want to approve changes to Git. But like whenever you go to these meetups, you kind of think, okay, I'm going to learn how to do this. I'm going to get an exact outline of how to do this. You're not going to get that here. You're not going to get that anywhere. I've done this at a couple places, and at each place it's different. So the only thing that you can possibly do is try something, mess it up a dozen times, and just keep trying it over and over again. And eventually you're going to get all the gears in place and step back and see a nice conveyor belt and say, something's working here. Something's doing what we want it to do. So what we have going in prod for our server configuration, we commit to Git, and Git via the GitLab CI runner. Where's Warren? I know he's a fan of that. Automatically basically replaces Jenkins. Git now sees the commit, pulls from Artifactory if it has to, deploys it to a dev server. What's it deployed to a dev server? The MOF file for desired state configuration. Once it's there, we run pester test to test the MOF. The pester test is editable, so if we miss something, add it to the pester test, never miss it again. On success, we move it to a stage, and then we get to basically our manual area. So the difference between continuous deployment and continuous delivery, deployment is you come up to here, and you then approve deployment into the prod environment. Delivery, you just fire through. But for delivery, as people on my team mentioned, you have to have really good testing procedures to basically cover all 99% of the stuff. We're not there yet. I get a feeling eventually we will be, and start basically get rid of that last manual dotted line and start firing through all the way to the end. So what I wanted to do before moving on to the code deployment part is I wanted to demo one of these. And let's see if it's up. It's I can't see the bottom line. I'm just trying to. I have VS Code up. Where are you? There you are. Okay, Visual Studio Code. Ooh, if you're not using this, you are missing out. The plugins here for this type of work is basically, I guess whatever vocab I'm trying to think of now is, if you're not using this, you're really losing a lot of development time. All the plugins and the community around this, whether you're on a Mac or a Dell, works brilliantly. So,
unless you're using it with a screen reader, that's horrendous.
Or that. Here's our PS1 file. Basically, this is our PS1 file that's going to create the MOF. Say we want to add a comment, and I'll add a comment of hi. Save my file, go to Git, pull the sync up, prep, and push. That's it. That's a production change. I'm going to bring you over to GitLab now and show you exactly what we're doing. Here we are running, going through the many steps. Test configuration, completed successfully. Test whether the configuration is valid. Doesn't even deploy it yet. This is a pure syntax test. Was it able to actually make something, and does that something do something? If anybody's written pester in the past, that's kind of the verbiage you want to use. Back out one there. Moff was successful. Let's see if this updated. This usually goes pretty fast. Yep, published to dev. Our dev machine accepted this. It deployed the configuration. Build successful. What does it do when it's there? Just because you deploy the MOF file doesn't mean it's right. Sometimes you could destroy a service. Sometimes you could ruin a folder. Sometimes you can ruin somebody else's code. So here's where pester kicks in, and basically every time we find something, we add it to the pester test. Is the cert right? Was this encrypted? Did it decrypt using the correct user? Then finally, let's see if this GUI finished up yet. There we go. Staged, ready to roll. This just went through the entire stack up until production and deployed the whole 2,000 line MOF. And then, if we wanted to, down, publish to prod. Say this bombs, how do you roll back? Every single previous publish is below it. That'll basically rerun that configuration MOF, push it out, fix your change right away. So that is 6 months worth of work. And it looks simple right away, but it's a lot of work. And I just wanted to thank the team that's here tonight. You guys freaking knocked it out of the park. This is fantastic. So now let's move on to app code. So you have your layers, right? We just pushed desired state configuration. The server is configured. That server is not doing anything. All it's doing is in a state that we want it to be in. We are now messing around with this basic pipeline to push package code in a .NET format out to the environment. Same kind of, framework with the eventual goal of merging these frameworks to say, hey, I want to be able to just push a thing and it'll spin up my server and then put the code on top. So commit to master. That is only it. This is outlined because I'll go through this through the next slide, but once you commit to master, the same process happens. The Git runner comes up and says, new code. Let me build it. Let me test it. MS build the entire thing. Let me package it. Let me put it into Artifactory and version control it. And then from there, we have Octopus deploy, pulling these packages in from Artifactory. And then we can say, all right, here's version 1.1 of Wayfair service. Let's push that out to dev. Let's test it out. Let's get developers in there to vet a couple things. They're happy with it. You commit your merge. Merge is 2 approvals. Somebody to access the merge and say, this is good, and somebody to then actually execute the merge and merge it into the master branch. Once that happens, rinse and repeat the same process. Build it, test it, package it in prod. Push it into the prod area of Artifactory. Automatically have Octopus deploy recognize it, and prep ready to push it out to production servers. This right here is the outlined area. So here's where the PowerShell people in the room are going to like this. We have a monolithic repo in .NET with 190 projects? 197 projects. Monolithic repos, obviously, the benefit is all the code's in the same spot. The detriment is you have to build the whole thing because all the code's in the same spot. We are using PowerShell to go directly into Git and finding only the projects that are being changed. We're building only those projects, and then releasing only those projects, and then testing only those projects via regex, and basically down the line. So our original builds for the whole monolith, 13 minutes, 15 minutes, we got it down to 9, and then through this, we're talking under 2 minutes, depending on the project that you choose. So you still get the benefit of your monolithic repo, and you kind of get the benefit of many, many projects at the same time without having to put that load on the server. And that's basically what I wanted to show. I wanted to basically say, this was the version 1 in December. I kind of liked the Iron Man thing because the thing with Iron Man is he never has the same suit for more than one movie. It's always he's building the next one, he's building the next one, he's improving it. He never says, all right, I'm done, this is it. This is for the next 3 movies, it's going to be this suit. He always blows it up, does something ridiculous to it, learns, rinses, repeats, and rebuilds to the next suit. So we're kind of following the same thing here, and to follow that, you need a really good manager because you're going to get quite a lot of stuff along the way, but eventually you're going to get a pretty great suit, and this is where we're at today. That's it. Thanks for the time. Thanks for coming, everybody. Enjoy Mr. Snover's presentation. We are hiring, so if you have any questions about Wayfair or any questions about the team or any questions about this stuff that we built, come to me or come to James or come to Kelly. If you have any questions about the individual slides and the technology in there, I can point you to the team member that's the kind of author of those. And enjoy the rest of the evening.
Sounds good. All right. I can't see. Is that the right one? Left. Hoo-ha. Howdy. I'm Jeffrey Snover. Hey, I got PowerShell stickers here. Yeah. So here, pass some of these out and put some in the back. If you don't get any, don't worry, I got plenty here. I'll just put some on the table over there. And if you want to take some for your friends, go for it. And can you put, here, give some of these, pass some of these around. And you can put some on the table out there, that'd be great. All right, that's our new PowerShell hero. I love her. She's awesome. Great. So, howdy. I'm Jeffrey Snover. I'm a technical fellow, and now I'm the lead architect or the chief architect of the Azure Infrastructure and Management team. So, good stuff. So, we recently had the PowerShell Summit in Bellevue, and I had like a 2-hour Ask Me Anything. Good Lord, I did not know what in for. Anyway, so it was 2-hour Ask Me Anything, and we had a lot of questions along these lines, right? Hey, what would the Monad Manifesto say today? You know, what's the next big thing in PowerShell? You know, where's the PowerShell? We had a reorganization. What's that mean? What's the meaning behind that? And are we at the end of PowerShell, or at the end of the Monad Manifesto? And as I thought back about those questions, I thought, oh, you know what? I think what people are really trying to ask is PowerShell done? Is it done? And the answer to this is yes and no. I'm an architect. I get to give answers like that. So yes and no. So let's provide some examples here. So the Monad Manifesto, I wrote this in 2002. In it, we laid out the Monad automation model, a way for people to develop automation in the most efficient way possible. That they wrote the code that only they needed to write, and then we would surface it as high-level task-oriented abstractions, commandlets. We introduced the Monad shell, the Monad management models, the remote scripting, and the Monad management console. These are the components of the manifesto. So I thought I'd take a little bit of time and kind of do a State of the Union. Where are we? A report card. And then talk about where we're going and why we're going there. So in terms of the automation model, boy, I'm just very happy with this. This has worked out really well. So this is the code that people write to write commandlets. It's very small and very efficient, and people are pretty happy with that, right? And so now you can write these commandlets in .NET. You can write it in PowerShell itself. You can write it in native code with WMI. You can write it in Windows workflows, OData. OData is a type of REST API. And now we're in the process of working with Swagger. Swagger is a way to document REST APIs. And from Swagger documentation, we'll be able to auto-generate a set of commandlets for your REST APIs. So this part of the Monad Manifestos worked great. In terms of the shell, we have a wide range of shells now, right? So we have PowerShell.exe, and with PS Readline, that's actually getting pretty good. In fact, a lot of the pain that people have with the PowerShell.exe is in fact the console host itself. And the console host, after what, 15, 20 years of complete stasis and inactivity, that team has finally started to invest, and they're doing a good job. The recent drops of the console host now supports 24-bit color. The speed's gotten great. You have transparency. They're actually starting to invest, and they will continue to. That team's all kind of fired up, so I'm pretty pleased with that. We, of course, have PowerShell ISE, the interactive scripting environment. We added Visual Studio Code support, right? That was actually largely done through the community. And now we have Visual Studio Code. And how many people are using Visual Studio Code? Okay, great, quite a few of you. That's where the bulk of our investment is going to go going forward. And you'll see, we'll talk a little bit more about that later. And now we've added the Cloud Console. So the Cloud Console, if you go up to Azure today, the Azure portal, up in the top near the title bar, you'll see this little icon. And you'll be familiar. It looks like a prompt, and you click it, and now you can get an interactive shell in the Azure portal. Now, there are two types of shells. There's the Bash shell, and then there will be PowerShell. PowerShell currently is private preview, but basically once this is public, what will happen is you'll click that, and we will basically fire up a container with PowerShell running in it for you. It'll have all the latest versions of the tools, and you'll be able to sit there in your browser and interactively code against Azure Stack, or Azure, excuse me. Now, in addition to this, we in fact have the Cloud Console. Has anybody seen a demo of it? Oh, it's crazy cool. We actually mount Azure as a drive, as a namespace. So you can CD into Azure and then do a dir and see your subscriptions, CD into one of your subscriptions, see the resource groups, etc. Crazy cool stuff. So in terms of these shells, we got work to do, but I think that's going really quite well. In terms of the scripting, this I just am very happy with, right? So we have a very wide range. I always wanted to have a wide dynamic range of options so that depending upon the problem you had, you could say, hey, I just want something quick and dirty, or I want something formal, or I want something formal I can share, or I need a big systems to work on this. And we have that very wide range of scripting. That was pretty top-ended for a certain set of things. And then as we did Cloud Platform Solution, we started to use PowerShell for our own mechanisms. We found we needed more out of it. We needed more developer-friendly features. So we added classes. This makes it easy to write desired state configuration providers, and for you to define interactions, basically contracts between one team and another. So we've added classes, PowerShell Script Analyzer, the gallery, anti-malware integration, and security. Just a little data point here. So, now I'm very heavily involved in Azure Stack. Azure Stack, 100% dependent upon PowerShell. Full stop. Somebody did a count as like over 250,000 lines of PowerShell in Azure Stack. We are using it. Now, again, part of that was written prior to having some of these features. And these features are actually were produced because that team really, when you're doing something at that scale and that level of production quality, you want a little finer control. So anyway, so that's what we have now is, a nice dynamic range between operators and developers. If anybody ever read the manifesto? Oh, not too many. Okay, well, if you have a chance, you might want to search Monad Manifesto. Pretty stunning document, I think, in terms of its clarity about what sorry. I read it and I'm stunned. I'll just say that, because it was actually written in 2001, and then I revved it in 2002 to update the syntax. But in terms of you map it against what we did, and the tracking is pretty darn incredible. Anyway, so pretty good document. So in terms of that, I think we're doing great. In terms of remote scripting, again, doing pretty darn good. So many of the commandlets support their own scripting. So I'm not going to talk about that. But in the generalized PowerShell remoting, we can now do remoting over WSMan. That's the thing WinRM implements. That's native Windows remoting. We can do it over name pipes for local. We added the VM bus. This is called PowerShell Direct. So basically, this is one of my favorite demos. You can connect into something, new PowerShell session minus VM name foo, connect to that thing, and disable all the NICs. And then keep doing things, right? Because we're going over the VM bus, not over the network. So that's crazy. And then we're adding the ability to do PowerShell remoting over OpenSSH. Okay? So in terms of remoting, doing great. Doing great. Oh, and we just added remote debugging. So that's in version 6 and Visual Studio Code. Crazy stuff. Has anybody tried this? Just insane. Yeah, is that crazy? So basically, you can have an invoke command, and there's two kinds of invoke commands. Invoke command and then a little command. There's invoke command, some big script, right? Well, Azure Stack, guess what? We're doing a ton of invoke command and these big scripts that we send across the wire. So now what you can do is in Visual Studio Code, you get to that invoke command and you can type F11, push the F11 key, and we'll step into that code running on the remote machine. It's just crazy, crazy good, crazy good. In terms of the managing console, you've got a number of things here. Exchange console. Honestly, I think we could do better here. Project Phosphor is something David Williams, the guy who's been leading the PowerShell plugin for Visual Studio Code, has just started. And the idea is if you write commandlets, module of commandlets a certain way, that will be able to auto-generate GUIs for that. So it's experimental. It's brand new. This is not the... Some people are doing open source where they say, hey, I do it, I keep quiet, when I'm done, then I make it available to everybody, and I hope you like it because it's done. And that's not at all what he's doing with this. David's a true open source guy. He had an idea, and so then he's open source. Step number 1, set up the GitHub site. Step number 2, what do you think we ought to do? Step number 3, hey, you want to help? And so this is being developed, so if you go to that, you try Phosphor, it's super, super raw, right? So don't go to Phosphor unless you're interested in, really interested in this and actually interested in helping move it forward. Other than that, just wait a while and we'll see what comes of it. Anyway, so if you take a look at these things, is PowerShell done? On most every account of the manifesto, the things that we tried to accomplish, the answer is yeah. Yeah, PowerShell's done. PowerShell has achieved critical mass and therefore is done. As a general purpose Windows scripting tool. So if we were just trying to do and be a general purpose Windows scripting tool, I would probably be reducing our investment in PowerShell and winding that down and saying, yeah, I got a long tail, but largely we're done. We'll just kind of get it in maintenance mode and add a few things. But the cloud changed everything, right? The cloud changed everything. So this is a new vision for PowerShell. We want PowerShell to be the connector of the hybrid cloud, right? We want to be able to use PowerShell from any client to manage any server running in any cloud or on premises using any hypervisor, storage stack, and networking stack. Okay? That's when we, Satya, we had this conversation, right? Satya basically said, hey, everybody, get out of your offices, stop talking to one another, go talk to customers, find out what they need, and give it to them. He says, look, don't worry about money. He says, if you make customers successful, we'll figure out a way to monetize it, right? A lot of people talk about, open source versus Microsoft business model, blah, blah, blah. Look, it's just one business model versus the other. Open source, I don't know, you guys ever heard of this guy, Linus Torvald? Yeah? Turns out he has kids, and he feeds them. Right? So turns out there's money flowing through that ecosystem somewhere. So look, here's the deal. Open source is great, but it's just a different business model, right? So anyway, he had a great point, which is, hey, just go make people successful, and we can figure out a monetization strategy for that. But if your customers are not being successful with your technology, pretty hard to monetize that. Okay, so anyways, we went out and talked to people. This was the story we heard loud and clear. This was the problem people had. People said, hey, this world of a Windows-only world, hey, that's great, but that's not really where I want to be. I don't want to have my Windows team and my Linux team because that doesn't give me agility. You know, at some point, how many people do I hire? If this team needs help, how do they get help? It's a mess. And so this was the mission that we've decided to embark upon. So is PowerShell done? No, the answer is not. In fact, we are increasing our investment in PowerShell. We are going from Windows to be cross-platform. We're going from being a platform to being solutions-focused. And we're going from focusing on servers to being able to manage clouds, services, and applications. So let's now put on my architecture hat and say, hey, there's a pattern here. Let's examine that pattern, right? So basically, having done what I say was a successful job with PowerShell, you have two choices, right? One is to do incremental change, to wind down your investment and just do incremental change, keep things going. The other option you have is transformational change, okay? It's very important to draw the distinction between incremental change and transformational change. You'll find this everywhere, this choice. We've chosen to do transformational change. Now, I'll help get this in focus. It's incremental versus transformational. Right? With incremental change, you know what the answer is, right? And you just have to execute on it. You just got to implement it. With transformational change, often you don't know the answer. Sometimes you don't even know the question. You know, it's over there somewhere, and I'm not exactly sure what to do, and so you got to go struggle. Okay? With incremental change, you know what to do. You need to sharpen your thinking, but with transformational change, it really requires new thinking. What does it take to be successful? It's not just take what I have and move it there. I had to think about things differently. With incremental change, there's a very high probability that you will succeed. With transformational change, you are guaranteed that you were going to fail. You're going to fail. It's very uncomfortable. Now, I'll draw a distinction. Let me take a point and talk about failure. Failure, bad or good? Bad or good? Yes. Answer is yes. Good answer. Let me draw two types of examples of failure. You come to me and you say, hey, Jeffrey, I spent 2 weeks on this and I failed. Okay, great. And you come to me and you say, hey, Jeffrey, I spent 2 years on this and I failed. Good failure, bad failure. Okay? No, it's failure. You got to be, if you're doing bold things, you are going to have failures. And you got to develop a culture. Failure's never like, oh, yay, I failed, right? Hey, Satya, let me tell you something. I just failed. That's not an email I write a lot, right? We're never comfortable with failures, but you got to get comfortable with failures. Failures means you're moving fast. You're doing the right pace. And what you want to do is you want to have small failures versus big failures. We just imported an executive from Google. He said, yeah, at Google, we know with exact monetary units how much an outage costs us. And so we were doing an analysis and they said, hey, how much did that outage cost us last week? And they said, $2.4 million. I said, okay, did we learn more than $2.4 million worth of lesson from it? And they said, oh yeah. I said, great, that was worth it. Let's move on. Okay, so with transformational change, it's hard, failures will occur, and that with incremental change, you preserve your identity, who we are and who our customers are. Look, I've been doing this for a while, I know a set of customers, I go ask those customers things, I've got this prioritized list of things they need, I know those people, they know what they want, and all of a sudden I got to go talk to people who might not even like me. Guess what, I go talk to Windows guys, Linux guys, we're not treated as liberators, like, oh, thank God, I've been struggling under this burden and this yoke and just waiting for the day Microsoft would come to my door and save me. That's not the conversation we have, right? And there's a certain level of distrust. And yet, so we have to prove ourselves of being honest of head and heart and say, seriously, just talk to me about your problems, etc. And so it's a different set of customers, it's a different set of needs, and sometimes it's a difficult set of conversations. But when you focus in on their problems and trying to say, what are your problems, as opposed to, I've got this hammer, just change everything you have into a nail, you can have great conversations. And we have had great conversations with them. And this is perhaps the hardest thing of all. And that is, with incremental change, your team stays intact. And when you do this transformational teams, often you lose people, right? You lose people. And the reason why is because this transformational change is so hard. I mean, it is super, super hard. And not everybody wants to do it, right? And then you have your choice. You're going to make the transformational change or not. And so often you end up losing people. Not everybody makes it. So these transformational changes are super, super hard. And it's very easy to fail at these things. And the easiest way to fail at it is to treat it like an incremental change. Now, let me just be clear on something. When you do a transformational change, you sign up for a big change like that, it can be so uncomfortable, so like, oh my God, look, I'm going through some of these things. I'm a senior guy, technical fellow. I walk in, it's like, oh my God, I'm just failing. Is my badge going to work today? Like, holy schmoly. I don't know how it worked, but it did. These can be very difficult. And sometimes you'll need to revert back to do some incremental changes, or some small things to get some successes, and then go back to doing the transformational change. If you try and stay in the transformational mode too long, you can get burned out. So every now and again, you want to fall back to this incremental change, do a few things, and then switch back. But here we're talking about hours and days, not weeks and months. If you go slip sliding and do a quarter's worth of incremental change, there's a chance you're not going to really stick with the transformational change. So Satya talks a lot about this growth mindset, and that's really what's behind this idea of this transformational change. A growth mindset is a world where failure is an opportunity to grow. I mean, how many times? Hey, boss, I had a failure. Oh, yeah, great. How did you grow, right? Often we think of failures as limits to our abilities, right? Think of that, hey, I'm either good at something or I'm bad at it. Whereas a growth mindset says, hey, what can I become good at? How can I learn? How can I take everything? Negative feedback is an opportunity to get better in a growth mindset. And the desire to try out new things, okay? So this is all really hard stuff. So examples of transformational change. Okay, you guys have all done it, right? If you're using PowerShell, you have participated in one of these transformational changes, right? The transformation from managing everything from a GUI to automation. Did everybody in your team make it through that knothole? Most people not, right? Was it easy? Was it comfortable? Boy, there's a whole bunch of things you got to learn. Right? If you're doing it now, maybe it's easy and comfortable. If you've been doing it for the last few years, these things are challenges. That was a transformational change. The people who got through that transformational change are being wildly successful. I think the last time I was here, after the talk, somebody told me, I was talking to somebody and they told me that they had tripled their salary. So if you have any hiring managers here, if they have PowerShell skills, you got to triple their salary. Just saying, it's a deal. So. Anyway, but people have been wildly successful in their careers, et cetera, in their companies. And boy, I saw that discussion of the pipeline. I'm looking at that saying, you nailed it, man. That's awesome. You are living the dream. That's good stuff. Okay, so that's an example of transformational change. That did not happen. That pipeline did not happen without hard work, right? And it probably would have been easy to just say, hey, why don't we just click the mouse? And so that's an example of it. Managing silos to managing your entire portfolio, that is a transformational change. Going from traditional IT to DevOps is a transformational change. Going from on-premises to the cloud is a transformational change. And going from Windows PowerShell to core PowerShell. Windows PowerShell is the Windows-only version. Core PowerShell is the open source cross-platform version. That is a transformational change. So, core PowerShell is a transformational change. Here's the $64,000 question. Oh, sorry. We're going to come up to that in a second. What is that transformational change? It is the thing I mentioned, being able to manage from any client to any server, any cloud, any hypervisor, on-premises or not. That's a transformational change. So, where we go. So now I'll drill into some of the details of those. First, PowerShell needed to be open source. You have no concept how difficult this was. Seriously. Windows PowerShell. Windows has one of the largest engineering systems in the world, and we were able to do things with that nobody else in the world was able to do. Okay, that thing was built over many, many years, and it's as though it's embedded into the foundation of the buildings themselves. Like, you want to do a compile in a different building? Like, no, it's not going to work. Got to do it all in building 26. So having to redo things, one, get everything out of source code and to get it into GitHub, that was a challenge. That was the smallest of our challenges. Redoing the build system, huge effort. Redoing the tests, we are still in the process of doing this test. Now, PowerShell's been out for 10 years. We had been developing it before that. So we've got 14 years worth of tests that we had to say, yeah, let's go re-implement those. I'm telling you what, that's hard, right? That's really hard. So now, again, think about this, right? Here, we got a team of people who, they talked to you and you said, hey, I love this PowerShell, but I need this feature and I need that feature. And you said, hey, I need this. I'm blocked on this. And they're ready, right? Hey, I can solve that. I can meet your needs. And you want this. I can make you happy, etc. And we're saying, stop. Don't do those feature works. Don't help those people. Go do this ton of grunt hard work to get an open source and to redo your tests. And what's you'll have at the end of it? And the answer is the same set of features, but just running in open source. And the answer is, yeah, that's what we're going to do. That was hard. That was super hard, because these were all really grimy, hard tasks. Then we said, okay, we're not just going to do the open source, what do they call it? There's a term for this, where you take a finished product and you throw it over the wall and say, yeah, it's open sourced. No, we're doing this with our heads and our hearts in the right place. We had to set up a governance system. We got lots of help from the Linux community on how to do this right. In particular, the chef guys were very helpful. And so we have a full governance model where, hey, if you want to code, you can submit your code and we'll accept it. Even to the point where we will have, and now we do have, community contributors. So basically the model is, you don't like the code, you can submit an issue and say, hey, Jeffrey, you should fix this. Okay, great. You can say, I don't like the code, I'm going to fix it myself. I'm going to snapshot it, I'm going to modify the code. Now, to be successful, you have to be able to snapshot the code, look at the code, so it needs to be in GitHub, snapshot it, make a change, and then build it, and then test it to make sure you didn't break anything with your change. So that's why it was so critical for build and test, so that you can do that. And if you're happy with the change and you didn't break the test, then you can do a pull request, and I'll take a look at your code and say yes, or make these changes first and do that. Now, what happens if, right now, for me to accept your code, for someone to accept your code into the source pool, they have to be an expert in the code. Okay? There are very few people in the world that are expert in the code because we've been closed source. Okay? So most of the committers are Microsoft people too. That's not really how you run an open source project, right? You want the community to do that. So as the community becomes expert in our code base, we'll be extending that maintenance role to the community as well. In fact, I'm pleased to announce that we have the first community contributor for PowerShell, and that's Vitaly. Sergey. The problem with that is that he was actually on the PowerShell team and decided to leave the company, but he loved PowerShell so much. He said, "Oh, can I please keep working on it?" It's like, dude, I don't pay you and you're working on it? Yes, if you force me, I'll accept that deal. Anyway, so he's a passionate guy, and he's doing great work on the PowerShell team. So now we have an open source committer. We will grow that list. Anyway, super hard stuff to do. When we launched this, we had AWS, Google, and VMware participating with us. I mean, how's that? Talk about a new open Microsoft, right? This is crazy stuff. You know, the VMware guys were particularly interesting because they had told me, they said, hey, you know, look, we love PowerShell, but we have a problem. I said, oh, what's the problem? They said, well, we have this first-class automation experience on Windows, and my Linux customers say that they're getting a second-class automation experience. And the problem is, it's true. And so I was like, oh, yeah, I see. And so I said, well, what if we were able to make PowerShell available on Linux? And he said, that would be great. Anyway, so they were very enthusiastic about this. They were able to now take their investment in PowerShell and give it to all of their customers. So anyway, they're very happy about this. So PowerShell, open sourced, doing very well. PowerShell Core, PowerShell runs on Linux. So the first task was to port to .NET Core. Anybody use .NET Core yet? Okay, great. .NET Core 1 or 2?
1.2.
1.2. And are you porting or new code?
New code important.
Has anybody ported code to .NET 1? Yeah? How'd that go?
Project
It was a
at
challenge.
JSON.
It was all right, except for if you were trying to port like anything that depended on system.web, then it was like, that was rough.
Version 1 of the .NET Core was, I'll just say, over refactored. They were hardcore, they were brutal. Hey, this is the right foundation, and they cut too much. So what we found is, if you write new code, works great. If you're porting code, most people found it too difficult, right? And so as we went and talked to Microsoft teams and said, hey, take your .NET code and port it to .NET Core, the vast majority of them all said, hey, this is too tough, we're not going to do that. All of them except one, the PowerShell team. PowerShell team did the hard work. There's an incredible amount of many man-months of work and tough code to get on .NET Core. Now, .NET Core, they heard the lesson. They've now added .NET Core version 2. .NET Standard Library basically gives you 90+% of the APIs available in the desktop version. Over doubles the API service. It's great. It's fantastic. Anyway, we did the hard work to get running on .NET Core version 1. It was important that PowerShell be seen as treating Linux as a first-class citizen. So at some point we're doing the review and said, yeah, we'll be able to have all these things. Then I realized, well, wait, how are they going to debug things? How are they going to edit things? In PowerShell, on Windows we have PowerShell ISE. It's a great visual authoring and debugging tool. I realized that if we don't have something like that on Linux, the Linux guys who are going to be reasonably suspicious of us are going to look at this and say, I knew it, you bastards, giving us the dregs, and this is the best experience, and it's like, no, we got to just be respectful of the fact that we have some bad history, right? We had a CEO calling their community a cancer, right? So of course they're going to be suspicious, okay? So no, we have to be beyond reproach. And we have to treat that as a full first-class citizen. And so that's why we invested in Visual Studio Code and the Visual Studio Code PowerShell plugin. And so that runs on Mac, it runs on Linux, Ubuntu, and it runs on Windows. And we got a guy who's working on that. Now that was a new project. That's done the way we like to do projects. It's done from the beginning with the community. I've got a full-time resource on it, but we also have the community who are maintainers as well. Keith Hill is a maintainer on that project, okay? And it's going gangbusters. The productivity is fantastic. If you haven't used it, you should use it. Anyway, so the Visual Studio, this tool, when made available to the Linux guys, is going to be the best, interactive debugging, authoring environment they've had for a shell like ever. Bash doesn't have anything like this, trust me. So anyway, so we wanted to do that. And it was also important to have cultural compatibility. So there's quite a few changes that we are making to PowerShell to make sure, PowerShell core, to make sure that it's culturally compatible with Linux. Now some of these are in fact breaking changes, but we looked at those and two things. One is we said, yep, we'll take the hit. And the second is we don't think it'll be much of a hit. Mostly these are edge and corner cases. If you encounter one of those, I apologize beforehand, but basically it was very important that we treat Linux with respect and fit into their norms, okay? So that's some things like case sensitivity, support for SSH, nobody's complaining about that, everybody loves that. But then things like ampersand backgrounding, which we just added, very cool stuff. Next, oh, well, we talked about this, right? Keith Hill, David Wilson, they're the maintainers for this. Now, we talk about VS Code, but that's actually a small portion of the story, right? In fact, there's something behind VS Code, and that's called the Visual Studio, just the editor services. So the editor services is a server, right? Server that has a REST API that Visual Studio Code's talking to. Okay, and what this means is now you can use any editor to talk to this editor services. So in fact, we used to demo all the time. We do Visual Studio Code and Sublime at the same time. You'll be able to use Emacs or VI, and have, if they support IntelliSense and they support auto completion, you'll be able to support your editor of choice with the great services from PowerShell editing. So that's just a honey. In terms of PowerShell, again, we want to be able to support this DevOps mindset. So we had to do a number of developer enhancements. So here's the real story. So we did Cloud Platform Solution version 1. Great, all PowerShell, right? Deployed entirely with PowerShell. Now at the time, I wanted them to use desired state configuration, but we had just started on that project. It was not mature enough, didn't have any resources. So I said, hey, go do it this way, but then the next implementation, I want you to rewrite that stuff using desired state configuration. So, time to do CPS standard. I said, hey, now I want you all to do this with desired state configuration so we can smoke out what the problems are. And the guy said, yeah, the team doesn't want to use PowerShell. I said, oh yeah, why is that? He said, they hate it. I said, oh yeah? Great, embrace the red. Let me talk to those guys, find out why they hate it. So I talked to them and they said, hey, listen, look, PowerShell is great, but I hate it. Okay, why? Tell me why. He said, look, I'm a developer and I'm getting measured and judged by my ability to deliver something. Now, number one is, as a developer, I work in Visual Studio, right? It has integration with my source code control. It's a tool I'm used to. And with PowerShell ISE, it's great, but it's not Visual Studio Code. So I don't want to learn a new tool. I want to use Visual Studio. Okay, great. What else? I said, well, I'm the general contractor for this, and I have all these various teams giving me stuff. And so I think about contracts in terms of interfaces and classes, and I can't do that. And so I've got to do script signatures, and sometimes they get it right, but often they get it wrong, and then it's hard to detect that. So I think in terms of signatures. And then the next is when I change code, I unit test it before I check it in, and I can't unit test it. And then he said, oh no, this is a different one. Then I said, okay, great, making the list. And then one day I was off to go get some coffee, and the development director for this, I thought he was going to punch me in the face. He was so angry. He's like, you screwed up my schedule. I was like, pretty sure I didn't screw up your schedule, but tell me more. What are you talking about? And he said, you screwed up my schedule. I had a developer who checked in a PowerShell script and he did something stupid, some syntax error, and he messed it up and we didn't touch it until this thing, and it took 2 days out of my schedule. Why can't we have something like a lint tool? It's like, that's a great idea. So these are all happening during PowerShell version 4, and so guess what? In PowerShell version 5 is when we went and addressed all those issues. So basically the conclusion, we had always, if you read the original Mona Manifesto, I said I wanted to have one tool that bridged the gap between operators and developers. But in fact, we had largely focused in on operators and then incrementally been adding more developer features. And here we decided, hey, it's time to put a heavy investment and really kind of close that gap, because now people are trying to do it for very large scale production systems, and we need to close that gap. So we added Visual Studio Code, We added classes. Now, to be clear, classes is a very broad range of stuff. We've implemented a pretty good first start on that, but there's more work to be done on that. We added the PowerShell script analyzer, so you can analyze your scripts, make sure you do best practices. This is an extensible mechanism. You can add your own rules, and you can suppress rules if you want. We added this PowerShell script, remote script debugging, and we just added desired state configuration debugging. Anyway, that team used desired state configuration for Cloud Platform Solution, and it was very successful. So, happy days. Now, core PowerShell in Azure. Okay, so I mentioned to you the Cloud Command Console. We're working to get desired state configuration in Azure, like at the heart of Azure, in all the regions at the very lowest level, so it can be used by everywhere. We have a principle which is basically third party as first party as third party, which is to say we want to use the tools that we give to users, and we want users to use the tools we use. We want that to be desired state configuration. So we're doing a bunch of work to plumb desired state configuration into Azure itself. So part of this is making sure that we have a common, right now we have 2 implementations of the local configuration manager. We're going to merge that and have one that's common across Linux and Windows, right? One set of bugs, one set of enhancements, just get on the common code base. We're going to support the ability to have multiple LCM instances, okay? Now this is something that the team wanted to do early on, and I told them, NFW, I will fire you if you do this until you can explain to me how you're going to solve these set of problems. And the reason for that is there's something called the competing controller problem. At least I call it the competing controller problem. Anybody who's tried to use desired state configuration and group policy together know the problem, right? Somebody's trying to control something and the other person's trying to control something. They don't know about each other and they're not coordinated, so they step on each other. And I referred to this as like getting along like 2 raccoons in a bag, right? It's not going to go well. Anyway, so it's like unless you can solve that, you can only have one local configuration manager. Well, at some point they came to me and they said, here's the solution. And they laid it all out. They had done the hard architectural work. I said, yeah, let's go do it. Now, what this allows us to do is we already have partial configurations, but multiple LCM instances allows us to have different cadences, right? That I might have one cadence to set up the base infrastructure, and I might check that just once a day. But then there might be things at the application layer that I want to check once a minute, maybe less than once a minute. You don't want to say, hey, I want to do a convergence cycle every minute for the entire system, right? You consume too many resources to do that. So what we want to do is to have a model that says, hey, I have system-wide consistency, but on this level, I'm going to converge it every minute, and this I'm going to converge every day or a couple times a day. So very good stuff there. We're actually developing part of plumbing desired state configuration into everything in Azure is to have a super small, lightweight version for sort of a bootstrapper. And so we're writing a native code implementation, and we're working on an LCM as a library that, in fact, for these very high frequency things, that you'll actually be able to put it into the library, as a library into your application itself, so you can have very low latency, very high frequency convergence cycles. So lots of investment going on there. So is PowerShell done? No, absolutely not. Going from Windows to cross-platform, going from platform to solution focus, going from server focus to services, applications, and cloud. There's a ton of work here. We recently reorganized so that we can bring more resources to bear. We used to have the PowerShell team, and then we had the solutions team on top of that, right? So this is Azure Automation and Operations Management Suite. Now those one team to do both those things, and so we're able to apply more resources to this. Something fun's going on. Okay, and so this is what we're going to be delivering to you, right? A tool that allows you to manage from any client, to manage any server on any cloud or on-prem using any hypervisor, storage, or networking stack. So that all sounds great. And they also heard me describe how much work it was and how painful it was. So you got to be sitting there asking yourself the question, why? Like, why are you doing that? And the answer is really simple, right? This is about, it's not about us. It's not about our technology. It's about you, right? PowerShell is here to help you with your transformational changes. Now, most of the people in the room have already done one. They've transformed from being Windows, click, 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 click next administration to automation. Many of you are still on that journey. But you have a bunch of journeys ahead of you, right? Your companies want to get out of this silo management and they want to be able to manage everything. That's a transformational change. You're moving from traditional IT to DevOps, moving from on-premises to the cloud, right? These are all transformational changes, and what we want to do is we are trying to help you with those transformational changes, right? Give you a tool so that you don't have to worry about, hey, on Windows I do it this way, on Linux I do it that way. Oh, I got these guys who know this tool and those guys that know that tool. None of that. One tool to help you manage everything so you can focus in on the hard work of those transformational changes, the things that are unique to your company and don't have to do with the tools, right? Let's just take that off as a concern. So as you pursue your transformational changes, here's some advice, right? The whole issue of like there's no playbook, I just encourage you, you just got to be uncomfortable is the new norm. And boy, that sucks. I don't like feeling uncomfortable, but uncomfortable is the new norm. So don't feel like oh, I'm uncomfortable, I'm doing something wrong. Like if you feel comfortable, chances are you're doing something wrong. There's work to be done there. Just yesterday, I went to the JFK Museum. Boy, that was inspirational. And he had a great phrase. He said, too often we choose the comfort of opinion over the discomfort of thought. Wow, what an inspirational guy, and what a way with words. So too, don't choose the comfort of incremental change. Choose the discomfort of stepping up for your transformational changes and embracing that. It's tough. In terms of this new way of thinking, I always go back to first principles. Like, what are we trying to do here? It's very easy to get caught up in the details and minutia of problems. Step back, step out of it, gain some distance. Say, okay, well, what are we trying to do here? And in terms of failures will happen, you really just want to adopt this growth mindset. If you search growth mindset, there's some really good literature about that. In terms of new customers and new identity, really just, it requires courage. Often we go and we try and hire smart people, experts. And I say, yeah, they're great. But I'll tell you this, in my view, what matters far more than smart and expertise is courage and grit. Right? These problems, right? These transformational problems, they are hard, right? And somebody who's an expert and then tries to do one of these big changes and gets a bloody nose and feels uncomfortable because they don't know how to do something and other people do, and they retreat back, those are not the people who are going to build your future. You want people with grit who are comfortable with this uncomfort, push through, solve it, and then bring others with them. In terms of not everybody makes it, that's the hardest. But Colin Powell once said, don't let adverse facts dissuade you from a good decision. So, in the end, PowerShell is all about making you successful. Okay? Right now, it's currently widely used through the industry, but what we're doing is we're investing heavily to transform it into a tool that can help you with your transformational changes. And why? And so that you can become a hero to your companies, help your companies do things they couldn't do before, and to get rewarded. It's that simple. So that's what we're doing. I got some time for some questions.
Feedback and
Please.
questions, actually. First feedback is I just want to thank you and the team for VS Code and the beta. I just run it on a Mac all day long, and David Wilson is unbelievable on GitHub. I mean, it's just, brought forth a couple of issues. It's remarkable to see them fixed.
He's just like that.
It's just like that. You're releasing the PowerShell plugin update maybe twice a week at this point. It's unbelievable. So I'm an AWS guy, and I've been using the AWS .NET Core commandlet since really September, October last year. I've never had anything fail. I mean, they worked under the alpha. And so I've been pretty successful with that. But my question to you is, when you say any cloud, is that what you mean?
Yeah. It means we're going to make sure we work with AWS and Google to make sure that their commandlets work great in this environment, that they work well in Linux and in Windows.
You know, they've been lockstep. Every time they update their API, they issue both the regular commandlets and the .NET Core commandlets on the same day. So I just hope if you have any contact with them that you will continue, because personally I've made a big investment in learning that.
Yeah, well, there's a little behind the scenes story there. So basically, the guy running all that is Shiva Prasad, who was my development director for PowerShell for many, many years. And so he went to AWS, and it's one of the reasons why they have and will continue to have great PowerShell support.
Yeah, it blows clients away when, so I just finished a gig where I did a bunch of stuff for them. I developed it on Mac, and they run it on AWS Linux.
Yeah, is that crazy? By the way, have you seen the format now in PowerShell Visual Studio Code plugin support? It can do format your code, so it does a pretty printer. And then I went to David. Oh, okay, you should tell him what you don't like. And so I said to David, hey, you know, the problem with hash tables is I hate it when you have like, you know, short name equals value and then long name equals value, and it's all messed up. Can we make it so that all the equal sign line up? Like 2 days later, he released a version with that support. So if you haven't tried that out, check out formatting of your hash tables.
Yeah,
But you don't like
I
that?
don't monopolize this, but I would say that I think you guys need to say whether or not the ISE is dead.
Oh, it's definitely, I can say that.
Okay.
The ISE is definitely not dead. The ISE is, ISE is supported and will continue to be supported, but it runs on Windows and will never be cross-platform. And because of that, the support for it has the features it has, and we'll keep those features running, but we probably won't add new features to it.
If Dave brings new stuff to the PowerShell editor service, would you guys port it back to the ISE?
That's what I'm saying we won't do. Yeah. Now, Dave's a rock star engineer, and he might, and basically, Dave's awesome. I think Dave's like the example of how we like to do things going forward, you know, working well with the community. We give him a direction. Go make these people happy. And he's out there talking to people, he's responding, da-da-da-da-da. He's doing awesome. There's a very good chance he might say, heck with you, I'm going to fix this and support it as well, because he owns both. But that's up to him. And my guidance to him was, hey, really focus in on Visual Studio Code.
Just one more feedback
Okay.
about VS Code and the PowerShell plugin. Are you familiar with Sapiens PowerShell Studio?
A while ago, yeah.
So I really think you guys need something like that. Because I find...
This is the GUI, the forms editor?
It's expensive.
Yeah.
Adam Driscoll already did that though on his extension. Well, that's for Visual Studio, but
It's based on XAML.
PowerShell Studio is not doesn't make your own GUI, it's a full-blown editor.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's...
Oh, well, there's okay, so then there's two. They changed the
They
names.
actually merge some of the features eventually.
Yeah, so which one were you talking about? The editor?
Sapiens PowerShell Studio, which has lots of things that heavy-duty PowerShell developers will want to use all the time. And I find myself drawn back to it, even though I'm forcing myself to use VS Code. And what that tells me is that, you know, for the ability to watch variables is so much better. I mean, there's the documentation is in the product. I mean, I don't know that you can do this in a free product, but I think you guys should take a look at something that's between VS Code and that.
Okay. Well, file all your bugs on
It's not a bug, it's a request.
a request, an issue. That's right. We call them issues. Yes, sir.
I have a question, two questions. One, following the ICID thing, VS Code is great. Now I have a question. My favorite IDE is Visual Studio. And right
Same
now,
here.
right now, the way PowerShell works in Visual Studio is not even the way it works in the PowerShell IC. There are a lot of problems there. And the features that I can get for C# .NET debugging, they're like, I don't know, conditional breakpoints, source stepping at any time, they're just not there. And I like really want them for PowerShell, and it should not be that hard. The IDE is there, the the language services are there. When is it going to happen?
I don't know the answer to that. Sorry, I don't.
Okay. The second question is, in Azure, there is a functionality called Azure Automation.
Yeah.
And there is a Azure Automation playbooks there.
Yep.
Which
Runbooks.
Runbooks, yeah. And it's a very nice UI, workflow-ish editor in the web. Is it going to be available for like myself to get it running for my stuff, to get a server on-prem and use that to build my workflows on-prem in PowerShell?
We don't have plans for that, but I will tell the team that that's I got a request for it. It'll go on the backlog. On the backlog, there's 2 flavors on the backlog. It'll come in the next release, or we got it registered. Not sure when it'll make it. This one's there's a bunch of work. So just make sure it's the, hey, can I get Azure Automation running on premises?
Not even that.
Oh, okay, maybe
The
I misunderstood.
editor,
Oh, the editor itself?
Editor where I can, my visual runbook.
The graphical one?
Yes.
Oh,
Because when I have a very complex set of code, set of like workflow, for example, in PowerShell, it's very hard to understand what's going on when you're looking through like thousands of lines of code. And there in Azure, it's very easy to understand what's going on, and it's very easy to adjust it.
yep. Yep.
But I would assume that works like that in Azure Stack though, because isn't the Stack just an on-premise version of?
A subset of
Oh.
Azure.
What I'm talking about is
Just be clear, yeah, I know what you're asking. Let me say two answers. So first is, you know what, you should file it as an issue. My guess is that's not going to get a high priority as the list of things I know most people are going to want will be above that. In terms of the Azure Stack, there's been some confusion about Azure Stack. I think that came about when we first released it. We had a zealous executive say, all of Azure in your data center. Now let's be clear, Azure has content distribution networks, right? So it doesn't make sense to run that on a 4-node server configuration, okay? So it is not, and probably never will be all of Azure running on there. And what we did was, Rusinovich and I and a number of PMs got together and we said, hey, what are the core services from Azure that people want to run on premises? And it's basically IaaS and a set of PaaS services so that they can build next generation cloud applications. And then that's what we're doing. And then each release will do 3 things. We will resync with the version of Azure, make sure we're consistent. We will continue to take additional Azure services and make them available on premises. And we will always work on fundamentals, performance, maintenance, monitoring, etc.
I love
And then
that
you.
PowerShell has become open source and is available on Linux. That's really great. I'm really curious about how it's going to be monetized. Like, what's the strategy behind it?
Yeah, Satya wonders that too. How's it going to be monetized? Well, look, go back to first principles, right? We believe, as a company, we believe in computing. Full stop. What does that mean? Computing is synthetic thought. We believe there's a relationship between thought and productivity and value generation. We also believe that people use a suboptimal amount of computing because there's friction in the system. In the past, that friction was cost. Servers were expensive. These days, servers are not very expensive. Physical servers are much cheaper. Virtual servers, very cheap. Cloud servers, cheap, and you stop paying for them when you turn them off. Okay? So the friction associated with cost is dramatically reduced. However, people still remain well below their optimal level of computing because there's another type of friction, and that friction is management. Okay, I just can't keep all those damn moving parts up and running. I can't get them up and running. I can't keep them up and running. The complexity is too large for me to cope, so I scale things back to the level I can deal with. So we believe that if we can help people harness and tap this, solve this complexity problem, that their level of computing will increase and we'll benefit from that. So then there's also is that all? And the answer is no, but that's sort of like the foundation of it. And then there's, in the past, PowerShell was just the pure platform, and now it's a combination of a platform and a product with the Azure Automation. That's all one team now. So we try and monetize it through value-added services that way.
Probably draws people PowerShell ecosystem.
Sure, although there, again, as a platform, we want to enable all the ecosystems, right? I want my AWS guys, they need to feel like this was a great bet for them. My Google friends, my VMware friends, they need to feel like this was a great bet, like the best bet they ever made. And that's our platform play. But then we'll have products on top of that, right? Desired state configuration, first few years there, we're very focused in. This is a platform. We will enable products on top of that. I was always very clear, at some point, we will have a set of products on top of that. We're now funding that. We're building a set of products, configuration management products on top of that. Oh, and then sorry.
What do you say to people that are afraid to install that PowerShell scripting with security vulnerabilities?
Yeah, they're just confused. People No, they are. They're just confused. So you kind of go to base principles, right? So one is, let me cut to the end game and then we'll work our way backwards. I was sort of disappointed to find out about a month ago that we hire some world-class red teamers and they attack our internal networks and they write up reports. And I found out about a month ago that they were moving away from using PowerShell. And so I had mixed feelings like, oh, good, why, don't you like PowerShell? And here was the answer when I drilled into it. They are moving away from PowerShell because it is now too easy to get caught when they use PowerShell. Okay, so now they're hand-rolling the tools. Now let's unwind that. PowerShell has never been the source of an exploit on Windows. Something else has been the choice of an exploit, a phishing attack, a protocol, something to give you remote code execution. When they use something else to exploit a system, they can run any code they want, and they chose PowerShell. Why? Because they have exquisite taste in technology. It's true. And they were just far more productive than if they wrote doing the same things. They can do exactly the same things in C# and Python and Ruby and any of those languages, except they're far more productive using it in PowerShell. Okay? Now in PowerShell version 5, if you haven't searched it, search for the term PowerShell and Blue Team. Man, Lee Holmes, rock star, security guy, just knocked it out of the park with PowerShell version 5, doing extensive logging, transcripting, just knocked it out of the park. And so therefore, now, when they can do anything, if they choose PowerShell, they are more productive, but they get caught. And so they're going to do things in Python and C#, etc. So that's what's going on there. Oh, wait, this guy, and then.
So
Yeah,
I
him.
have like two questions. One question is just when will Linux be Linux with PowerShell seems like kind of early days still.
Mm-hmm.
It's very much like an alpha or beta product. It's
Beta.
very early
We just went to
days.
beta.
Just went to beta. What's the kind of timeline for it to go to 1.0? And also, are there plans in the future to make Linux specific commandlets like Windows has, like an Apache commandlet, an Nginx commandlet, or are you kind of working for the community to kind of build those things?
Yeah, so basically, let's talk about open source and how this works. So in the past, I would sit in front of you and I'd say, okay, here are the things we're going to do, and here's where we're going to ship it, right? And when we do that, we had a pretty good idea of who was going to be available and what our tolerances were and how long it could happen. And generally, we delivered those things on that time frame, by and large. Now here's the model. The model is, hey, here are the things we're thinking about doing. What do you think? And one of two things happen. You give us feedback on those things. One of two things happens with that feedback. Number one, if I ignore it, guess what? I can do all those things and deliver on that time frame. But if I decide to pay attention to your feedback, then, well, where am I going to get those people to do that work? And the answer is, I'm going to get it by freeing up some people from the things we want to do. So that is the heart of open source. In open source, you trade off transparency and flexibility, agility. You get those things, but you trade off predictability. these things on this date. You don't have that anymore unless you decide to blow off users, and what's the whole point of doing open source but to listen to your users, because it ain't about me, it's about you. So the answer is, you're ultimately going to tell us, but we think it's definitely this year and probably this fall. The second question I forgot already.
Are there plans to make like
Linux specific stuff. Yeah, so as a general rule, what we're trying to do is to deliver things in the most efficient form. So in fact, what I'm trying to do is to figure out how I can ship some of the commandlets, break them out of PowerShell itself, and ship them in their own studios, etc. So that's an area where, honestly, we'll monitor it. The question is, yeah, we don't have a beat on that. The degree to which I need it for the things I'm doing, we'll do it. Beyond that, we're not sure. Certainly, we'll be friendly to the community. And sorry, then you and then you.
I just wanted to mention, for Wafer, we didn't use DSC anywhere until what I called the DSC patch. So we patched 500 servers. That patch was PowerShell 5 because it locally encrypts the LCN. So if anyone did something dumb and opened plain text the password, at least I could guarantee that the local LCN was encrypted throughout. So we didn't push anything until they were at least 5.0 across the board.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks. And that was we got that from community feedback. We explained, well, wait, no, it's fine. We encrypt all the passwords, and they say, but what if somebody doesn't know that it's a password? Or what if it's an API key? And it's like, oh yeah, you're right, we missed that. So that was a great example of working with the community. So then you and then...
So I have two questions, one you more or less answered, but how quickly can we expect where you're trying to get to? Because that is a problem today for which we are actually looking
Oh, yay.
solutions today, right? Companies are not going to wait because we're already working towards automating and the cloud hybrid model. So timeline on that. And second, when can we get Lee in here to talk more about just security? We'd love to have that.
Yeah, just ring him up or let me know if you want me to. I'll ping him. Yeah, he'd be a great person to talk to. He's awesome. In terms of the first, it's open source. You can grab the beta and use it now. It's in pretty great shape. If you have problems right now, so what's, better question, what's the difference between beta and RTM? And the answer is this. If you have a problem with the beta, you tell me, we'll address it. But if you call customer support, they'll say, what are you talking about? Like, what's this thing? At RTM, you'll be able to call customer support, and it'll take you a lot longer, and you won't get an answer. So you're still going to go to GitHub and file it there, and that'll be your quicker way to respond to it.
That's also the beauty of Twitter, too.
Yeah, it is. That's right. Yeah, David Wilson's proven that. Man, I just wish I had 10 more guys operating at that mindset and that level. He's extremely fast in Twitter. But to be clear, David's kind of exhibiting bad behaviors there. He shouldn't be taking Twitter support, because then once he does that, then people are asking me, hey, Jeffrey. And it's like, no, don't be asking me stuff like that on Twitter. Sorry. Okay, try this
What's
side.
the latest with handling order marks between the Linux and the Windows world? What default encoding are you going to assume? Linux.
Oh God, we had a long thread on that. I don't know where we ended up, but that was one of the core issues around this cultural compatibility. So I don't know where we ended up there, but
conclusion on there, but I can't remember.
there's a few things that are not. So when I get back, I'm going to meet with that team on a pretty regular basis to say, okay, we got a number of these things that are laying around open too long. Aliases, like, come on. We got some hard things there. Nobody's going to be happy with the answer, but you got to have a solution. And you got to have a solution I like. So put a stake in the ground. Let's fight it out, and then declare it so that if we've missed something, look, we got ourselves in a mangle with the aliases, right? On Windows, you type PS, and then what happens when you bring it to Linux and you type PS? What should you get? Right? This all kind of blew up about curl. Yeah.
You got to give up on curl as an alias.
We already said we would. Full stop. So now, but it's not about curl, it's about the set of them. So we just got ourselves in a mangle, and we got to unwind it. And in unwinding ourselves out of the mangle, there's going to be some changes that need to be made.
I forget what that alias was for anyway.
There you go. Invoke web request. There you go.
Oh.
Is the Azure CLI going to be completely rolled into PowerShell at some point? Because there are certain things like Azure templates that can't be done unless you're using Azure CLI.
Yeah, so what we want to do is, so it's a funny story about this. Like Scott Guthrie himself is PM in the Azure CLI. I'm not making this up. We were meeting with him, and he's like, wait, it should be doing this. What about this? And what about this? And show me the documentation. How's that going to work? No, it can't be doing that. We've got to do this. And so then we're like, because basically the original Azure CLI was written in JavaScript. It was not particularly good. So now we have a new one written in Python. Guthrie like PM that thing himself. It's quite amazing. Scott's the real deal.
Python, that's awesome.
Yeah, and so now, and so it's its design center was provide a great native Linux experience. Okay, so then great. So now we're writing all the documentation up, and here's the Azure CLI examples, and here's the PowerShell ones. And he says, hey, the PowerShell ones they're not compatible. Blah blah blah. Jeffrey, you need to fix that. So Scott's betting my job. We're going to get that fixed. So watch that space. Turns out when your boss bets your job on something, things happen. Sorry.
So, what are the chances that there will be a good interface for local groups and users for Windows?
We added that. Yeah. So, did you see it and you don't like it, or you haven't seen it?
I still try to do with the WinNT keys to get to the local users and the groups.
Wait, so have you seen the add local user?
There's a local user module now.
Have you seen the Carbon module from PowerShell Tower?
Yeah, it's in version 5. Yeah, we added all that stuff in version 5. It's again one of those sad things, like some team didn't step up to the plate, so I just said, time after time after time, like, hey, give them a dope slap. You got to do this. People want this. They didn't do it, so then I ended up not doing some language features to go do their work for them. So that's what happened there.
And I know this might not be under your sphere of influence, but is there, as you're doing this, you're fixing your tests and then you're putting out new features and adding the big push, do you guys have stuff in your backlog to kind of fix some of the more, I don't want to say atrocious, but not ideal commandlets that are baked into like core server features like DNS and DHCP are really hard to work with, and NTFS apples and shares and just like day-to-day operational stuff that it's like, this could not be more painful. Right.
You don't have time, write your own.
I don't have anything. I'll just say I'm aware of that problem. I'm working on something, and I don't want to talk about it. Because chances of success are not high. Okay.
I have a question. So there's a great feature in Windows, PowerShell web host. And it's based on .NET MVC. Now we have .NET Core, and for me it seems pretty easy to go pack that into Kestrel, and then on any platform we can do PowerShell start host, and it brings up the web UI, and then people can customize the web UI using JS, stuff like that. Is it anything that the team is thinking about?
Boy, that's 2 for 2. No, I have no idea. You're asking all the hard questions. Sorry.
I swear this one's going to be easy. It's a two-part.
Thank God.
So, one, do you have any plans to roll support for natively executing PowerShell into MS Build?
Wait, say the question again?
Do you have any plans to add support for natively executing PowerShell into MS Build? You have the exec task right now where you can execute with the command line.
So basically, you guys know Kenneth Hansen, longtime PowerShell PM? Yeah. Okay. So basically, we kind of like refocused Kenneth now on DevOps. So he's out talking to people, saying, "Hey, what do where's your pain in DevOps, etc." And he's producing that prioritized list. So I know that hey, PowerShell as part of the entire release pipeline, it has roles to play. Where's the most important role to play? So that he's driving that conversation.
That's the direction in which I should be.
Say again? You want that? Okay.
With the new project files, you easily can do that with zero effort.
Yeah, I'm talking external targets, really.
And with external targets as well.
So nice. All right, second part. The next release of WMF, do you know if it's going to be backwards compatible? Just because 5.1 over 5.0 kind of jacked up our ecosystem, and we didn't see that coming.
Oh, great question. So we're probably not going to release another WMF. Yeah, so let's be clear about what the WMF is and then where we're going with that. So the Windows PowerShell is version 5.1, and there's a WMF associated with that. And now we're shifting our focus to to .NET to the core PowerShell. So the core PowerShell is built outside of Windows, and then at some point we will ship it in Windows and down level, right? So being out of the Windows engineering system gives us lots of flexibility and compatibility. Now, the full version, .NET, the Windows PowerShell version is 5.1. At some point that might be 5.2, and it might be 5.3, and it might be 5.12. But that thing, the current plan is to never bring it to 6. Remember I mentioned to you that there are some breaking changes. The intent is to not, sort of put a coat of shellac on that to focus in on this cross-platform version. Now, exactly how much we do, frankly, I'll just be completely transparent. The story with .NET 2.0, .NET Standard 2.0, is that you can write commandlets to that, and they will work in the Windows PowerShell, and they'll work in Core PowerShell. And if that's true, then that strategy I just mentioned was going to work out great. If it turns out that's not true entirely, then I might end up having to take some Windows 6.0 features, some PowerShell 6 features, and putting them in the Windows PowerShell. But I'd really like to avoid that. I really want to say, hey, this is great, 5 versions, 5.1 versions. Now we've got this new thing, and that's where we're putting all of our energy. Again, remember, it's hard, and there's always this desire to go back to the incremental change. 5.1, 5.2, 5.3, that's the incremental change. We know that world, we're comfortable with it, etc. As much as possible, I want to get people to this uncomfortable world. Go nail that, go solve those hard problems.
The only problem with the current version of WMF is if you put that on an Exchange server, it breaks it.
Which is to say, if you ignore the release notes and put that on an Exchange server.
Only problem, no.
Yeah, it breaks it.
Yes,
So, yeah.
release notes are important. Yes.
So are you saying that you will install PowerShell 6 in a Windows environment?
Yeah, it'll work side by side. Yep, work side by side. In fact, well, have you been using, so you should try this on the VS Code. So at the bottom, you're editing something, it tells you PowerShell, and it says PowerShell version 5.1. And if you click on, if you've registered the other version, you can click on that and change it. So in fact, you can change it now from 32-bit to 64-bit. You can change it to PowerShell version 6. It's really quite nice. Yeah, Warren.
Just a note on the release questions. There's a good issue out there, PowerShell 6.0 plan that goes through all the basic issues that they want to cover before they release it. So that's a good spot to.
Oh, yeah, thank you very much. So let me highlight that. So on GitHub, there's a list of things. So when are we going to release? I said, remember, it's super important that the Linux community view us as friendly, right? Not enemy. And so I said hey, we cannot ship until we address the following issues. And so we'd love any feedback on that. If there are things you think, hey, you really got to nail it, like ampersand. Oh man, for some reason getting ampersand support was like pulling teeth. We just say, type a command line, type ampersand at the end, and now you get PowerShell background jobs. Right? Oh, it's great. That was a long time coming. But if you had a shell where you could, in Linux where you couldn't type ampersand at the end, they'd just be like, "What, are you confused?" So.
And then an actual question. So are you familiar with Azure notebooks?
Nope.
Basically Jupyter or.
Jupyter, familiar with it? Yeah.
So do you have any plans, or do you know of anyone at Microsoft working on a PowerShell kernel with that? I know Sergey actually wrote one a while back, but it hasn't lived.
Yeah, it's been, so these Jupyter things, it basically allows you to write a notebook and then have interactive code go in there. Yeah, that's come up a number of times. I thought somebody was working on it, but apparently I haven't seen it. So I know that we've got a bunch of the infrastructure to support it, running PowerShell and containers. We are doing, did we talk about this? Can I talk about this? Yes. Let's vote. I think we talked about this. So in the future versions of the documentation, you're going to be able to do interactive PowerShell directly in line with the documentation. So kind of Jupyter-esque, but different.
Can PowerShell be used for doing mobile device management?
not that I know of. So let me be clear about that. So the mobile device team, the Intune team, is making a lot of hay these days about their PowerShell support. But what that is it's a PowerShell support of their cloud service. The individual devices, yes, no, so certainly PowerShell itself runs on Raspberry Pi, the Windows version that runs on Raspberry Pi. It runs in our IoT offerings. It's an optional component that you can put on that. Once it's available on Linux, you should be able to run it on anything in Linux.
What would be cool is like, once it gets available more on Linux and is more supported, like, if other, like Linux appliances incorporated it and supported it and stuff too.
Yeah, in fact, we've had a number of the distribution vendors come talk to us and explore the idea of including it in their distributions. So we'll see, maybe.
So I assume PowerShell code will eventually move to Azure Automation at some point?
Yeah, exactly when, we got to figure that out. Again, it comes
to...
to...
have another mechanism for the PowerShell workflows that are there? Because I saw they kind of moved to others.
Yep.
It's kind of like a sign that it's not going to be invested in them.
Yeah, currently, so originally the workflows were not part of .NET Core, so that's why we weren't there. Then the open question is to the community, hey, should we port workflows to the new platform? It's a mistake to say the new world will be everything I did plus. You want to say, hey, here's an opportunity, and if something's not used or not needed, don't bring it forward. So this is an area we're looking for feedback on. Honestly, we've been asking that question and haven't been having a lot of people say, yeah, we need it.
We need it, yeah.
Oh, please go to the website and speak up. Yes, super seriously on this. That would be very helpful.
Let's introduce some kind of other async workflow, async approach.
Well, okay, so please do go file that as an issue. One of the things you'll be asked is, Bruce Payat just recently wrote up a proposal. There have been a number of asynchronous job packages, RS Job and some of the others. Anyway, so Bruce has written up one. This is one we felt, no, I think slightly, we don't want to use one of the community ones. We think the semantics aren't quite right, and he's written that up. And so there'll be a question, hey, does this meet your needs, or do you need something else? Sir.
Maybe this is a feature, and I'm not sure, but is PowerShell supported in Azure Functions? And if not, is it planned to?
So I'm not an Azure Functions person, but I just read somebody saying that they were using it. It is supported?
Oh, that is.
Yeah.
One thing that I've noticed is that a lot of there's been a big shift from the snap-ins to the modules. What's Microsoft stand out? Is Microsoft going to take the current snap-ins that Microsoft has written and convert those to modules? Because right now in VS Code, you have great IntelliSense for modules, but it doesn't work for snap-ins because you load it through.
Yeah, we've been telling people since version 1 to not use snap-ins, and then we're not supporting snap-ins in PowerShell version 6.
I mean, these are Microsoft written snap-ins that still are not converted, like specifically the FEM and now MIM module. It's all a snap-in right now.
Yeah, no, those teams need to get with the program. I'm going to go on this side because these guys keep asking all the questions. How about over here? Yes, sir.
I remember in a previous role you were responsible for System Center, I think.
Yeah.
Is that still part of the hybrid automation strategy?
Yeah. So I spent a lot of time on Azure Stack, and the key message for Azure Stack is a cloud play, and there's still a virtualization play, and the virtualization will be System Center, Windows Server, and then anything you want. So in a world where I want to do anything, I want to control everything, that's virtualization, that's System Center. Azure Stack is more of an appliance experience. We pick the hardware. You pick the hardware. You pick the vendor and the capacity. We've worked with that vendor to make sure that they are only using hardware. In fact, there's a white list. They can't slip anything in there. It's only the hardware that we've certified that works. So.
You said you got some work left to do on classes, PowerShell classes.
Yeah.
are you gonna make it so that they can be like exported module numbers as well? It's kind of a pain right now. It's still a little bit easier to just have the DLL and just add type to the CS file.
Right. I don't know whether that's on the list to do for 6.0. I don't think it's a required thing, so it'll be, yeah.
I can show you a way it's actually very easily done. Very easily done. There's a hack around it.
I've just been doing add type in a manifest.
No, you can write a real class, then you can write it in as a .cs file, get a content, and edit type. And process all the files in the folder, and do that and it works.
Power of the community. Let's take 2 more questions. Let you guys get out of this hot room. No more questions? Okay.
So going back to the System Center for a minute,
Yeah.
is there any news on System Center having, like SCCM having a little bit better support for DSC? I think the last time we looked into it and we talked to a PFE from Microsoft, and they were like, yeah, we don't really do DSC, and then they kind of left it. We never really came back to it, but we've been checking in. I haven't heard anything.
Yeah, so so when we said System Center, in fact, we have 2 flavors of System Center: server-oriented and client-oriented. SCCM is in fact a client-oriented product that supports some server stuff, but their mission is client stuff. So whether or not they support DSC really is kind of their plan of record, and I don't know what that is. Yeah. Yeah. My guess is they're going to focus more on, certainly for desired state configuration, our primary focus is servers. It can be used for clients, and if it does, that's great, but our primary focus is on servers. Last question? I want to call it a night. Okay. Oh, let's hope I get to answer this one. You guys couldn't have saved me? Really?
Are you thinking about introducing a concept of syncs into PowerShell? So right now, for example, I have a way to output the data using like the out stuff. I can write it, I can preserve it. But now, let's say I have data and I want to flush it to a sync, like some queue, some asynchronous service, and I want to continue and just make sure it gets there eventually. And there's nothing like that. I can do a workflow and leave it hanging there, but then I need to check up on it. I need to do something like that. But there's really nothing for REST APIs and stuff like that for like queuing services. Are you thinking about it or not?
It's a deceptively simple question. There's actually quite a lot of things behind it, and we have been thinking about that for quite some time. But yeah, I don't have any. Okay, I'm going to take another answer. I want to land on it. Something I can answer well. Not you.
Is right host still considered harmful?
No, right host is no longer considered harmful because now, in the past, right host was considered harmful. He would. He's wrong. It's okay. You bring out his credentials, I'll bring out mine. I think. So in the past, right host, basically, if you wrote to the host, you couldn't script against it. And now the host, we have a new channel. It's the information channel. You write information, and that's a rich channel. And all the right hosts go through that. So in fact, you can capture the information that comes to a right host and program against it. So in general, if you're doing right host, you're not building composable tools, but it's no longer kill a puppy type feature.
Does right host still kill the pipeline?
What?
Yes, it does.
The pipeline. Does it still kill the pipeline? Because in the past, there were times where bugs or something would get passed through, would get put it wrong later on, it would get passed along, so I'd throw on a right host just to break the pipeline.
Not familiar with that one.
Yes, it does, but you should have done out now.
Information actions silently continue, if I remember right, so probably does.
Okay.
If you use PS Analyzer, it'll caution you, recommend you don't use right host.
Yeah,
And then
exactly.
the updated version is recommending right information.
No, it's not. It's just not. It's still not. You're not. Don's point is, hey, you want to build tools that can be composed, and when you're doing right host, that's not the best tool. But you can do it. Yeah.
A lot of old commandlets tied to the output streams by their ID, and because when right host was fixed, you introduced a new ID for it. A lot of old commandlets still don't support that number, and they don't know, and they either fail or treat it as zero.
The hosts. Yeah. Okay, somebody give me one more easy question. I was doing fine till this guy asked a follow-up. Got to go out with a bang, something easy.
Is PowerShell done?
That's a great question. Yes and no. Thank you. That was good. Thank you. You saved me.